Welcome again to this third session of the second day of the Knowledge Summit 2019. The contribution of agriculture for comprehensive development and precision agriculture. Our third session will be focusing on agri-food innovation, revealing the power of agriculture. The speakers will be Dr. Joseph Schmidhuber, Deputy Director, the Trade and the Markets Division in FAO, and Carla Tenaz, the co-founder and CEO of Future Agro Challenge, and Gonzalo Martin Diaz, Director of Hispanic Analytics. And the moderator of this session will be Sanji Sethi, Director of Sustainability in Phoenix Group.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This session is about agro-innovation and how we can use innovation to develop sustainable solutions. So we have excellent speakers on the dais, and that is, to begin with, I have Dr. Professor Joseph, and also I have Carla and Gonzalo. So we have these speakers. They will come and introduce themselves and also share their presentations with you. And after that, we will have a panel discussion. And then we expect you to ask some questions. So there is an open house. There are not too many rules for this session. We can ask the questions from any one of them, or anybody from the audience can also make their points in the end. And I will be moderating the discussions, but my fellow speakers can also ask me the questions. So to begin with, I would like to share with you my presentation. And this is about sustainable agriculture. So I would like to request the organizer to kindly put up the presentation. So the topic and title of my presentation is Sustainable Agriculture Practices and How to Mitigate the Risk in Agriculture and Food Industry. As you have noticed in the last 1.5 days, that the focus of this entire event has been on sustainability. Sustainability is a word that we have heard so many times, and there are people in this world who have heard about sustainability so many times, and they have become a little bit bored after hearing this word again and again, without actually understanding that what the sustainability is. To say in brief that we are talking about, if we are making money, how do we ensure that we keep on making money? If we are taking money today, how do we ensure that we do not do anything to jeopardize the future of our future generations? We not only focus on profit, but also on the other two P's. That is the P for planet, that is environment, and the people, whether the people are inside the company or outside or in the communities that we function in. So, as a company which is into food and agriculture, our company, Phoenix Group, it's a $2.5 billion company focused on integrated food and agriculture businesses, majorly focused on horticulture, rice, and some other agriculture commodities. We are probably the second or the third largest in the rice business, handling about 2 million tons of rice. And we procure from South Asian countries and bring it to Africa and Middle Eastern countries. So we look at our business like a different kind of a risk. For example, if I ask the audience, how much water you think would take 1 kilogram of rice? Probably you will talk about the water that is used at home to cook the rice, or maybe a little bit of few liters of water. But actually, you would be surprised to know that sometimes it takes 2,000, 2,500, or even 3,000, 4,000, or even 5,000 liters of water to produce just 1 kilogram of rice, depending upon which country and which situation. But the fact is, when you take so much of water to produce 1 kilogram of rice and a product which is not even so much high in nutrition as far as the proteins and the vitamins and other things are concerned, you beginning to ask the question that has the God given the right kind of debit notes to these organizations, to these farmers in terms of the cost of water? Have we really figured in the true value of rice? If not, then this is a potential risk. What is the potential risk? Tomorrow, if in a country like India, the water become deficient and you do not have enough water, who would be hit first? Those who are based on the agricultural businesses, companies like ours, who are based on rice as a business. But rice coming from a country like India or Pakistan, the basmati rice, has a preferred market in the rest of the world. So it also fetches a very important foreign currency for these countries. But at the same time, if there is no water tomorrow, for example, we have a factory in Karnal in northern part of India, and we see that if the groundwater situation is getting contaminated because people are pumping water in large quantities, and as a result the water table is going down. So if the water table was 5 meter here and it has gone down to 20 meters in the last 20 to 30 years, that means every year probably half a meter or maybe 1 meter the water table is going down. So if there was a water quality which was not good 100, 200 kilometers away and the water underneath was saline, that saline water now begin to travel and flow towards the area where there was a sweet water underneath. So the large reservoirs of sweet water in the area that we grow our rice or we procure our rice from in Karnal region is now beginning to get contaminated. So if this large reservoirs of sweet water get contaminated so much that tomorrow you cannot grow rice in that region, that means you have a potential risk. So this is just one of the risks that our company faces. So there are so many other environmental, social, and governance risks that the company faces. And if you do not take care of those risks in the era of social media today, very quickly companies can erode their value if they do not take care of this, because people can actually tweet or send the messages very quickly and it can multiply, it can go viral, and companies can lose value. So you have to look at not the traditional financial risk, but also the environmental, social, and governance risks. So we conducted an exercise called dynamic risk assessment with the help of an organization called World Business Council on Sustainable Development and KPMG, and they came out with some top risk which some of the food and agriculture companies faces. We also did another exercise inside our company with the help of Global Agribusiness Alliance, and we did the enterprise risk management services, risk management exercise, and we came out with some of the top risks that our company faces in terms of environmental, social, and governance risk. So when we combine the two, that the risk which the industry is facing and the risk that we face, we come to a cluster of risk. That some of the top risks, like farmers don't know the best way of growing agriculture, probably the lands are getting degraded, probably there is a social media risk, water risk, probably there is nitrogen deficiency happening or nitrogen leaching happening, nitrogen efficiency not being there, that instead of providing the fertilizer to the plant root zone, we are providing fertilizer to the whole field. So whatever the root zone takes, and the rest gets leached into the groundwater, and the groundwater gets contaminated and the people are drinking water. If tomorrow somebody dies, then it's a potential risk for those who are the culprits. So when someone dies, if there is an anger, anybody can become target, even if logically that company or that person may not be the right one. So we have to think about such eventuality and work for those risk mitigation. If you cannot mitigate the risk, probably at least address the risk and do something about it. So we as a company, we realized that if we put the risk on the basis of their likelihood and their severity, if you see on the on the y-axis, you have the severity of risk, that if that risk happens, how quickly it can, how severe impact it will have on your business, how much your business can be devastated as a result, or what is the likelihood of that risk. For example, land degradation has a very severity of risk, but probably in the next 5 years, it's not going to happen. Something like social media risk is just 3 months away. Probably something happens tomorrow and you can be hit with that risk immediately. So when we plot this risk, we understand that there are some risks we come together, they come in clusters. So you need to have the mitigation strategy, and some risk you should go to the root cause. For example, it is said that the greenhouse gas emissions are caused because of the rice crop. But if we go into the root of that, it is the water which is being utilized on those puddled farm, which actually leads to these greenhouse gas emissions. So you have to look at the root cause of those risks. So we identify water as the key risk if we want to mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions. So by looking at this cluster of risk, by looking at the root cause of the risk, by looking at the prioritization of the risk, which DRA exercise helped us to prioritize for us as a company, we started focusing and we started remodeling and we started reimagining our own business. So the business was not as usual for us. Now we looked at our business as focused on not just the hunger, not just the quality of life for the communities that are involved, the farmers that are involved, but also ensuring that we heal the planet as we do our business. So we signed up for climate smart agriculture, and we became a part of a climate smart agriculture 100 club, and we focused on resilience mitigation, not just on the productivity. And this is one example of sustainable rice production in Vietnam, where we worked with smallholder farmers and we worked with them to create an SRP rice. SRP is an initiative by United Nations, and this initiative means that if you have a score of 90 on the basis of water, on the basis of land degradation, on the basis of integrated pest management, on the basis of how much chemicals you use, on the basis of whether you take care of the food loss in your business or at the farm or in the chain, or more specifically at the farm, because SRP is a farm-based certification model, or whether you're gender inclusive, is there a child labor on the farm, and whether the occupational health and safety or the environmental health and safety, all those aspects have been taken care of. So these are the aspects which give us a score of 90, then we call it SRP rice. But is the farmer, whatever the rice it is producing, whether the consumer will be able to pay for that? That's a big question. So the second is the integrated pest management. Can we take care of the pest without using so much of pesticides? Water stewardship, that can be like a true water steward, make sure that we do not cause so much of degradation or so much of the groundwater quality, not just the quality but also the total water use, and not just the total water use but also the water balance, not just the water balance but also taking care of those water related areas. In a country like India, they play a very important role because there are so many social activities and religious activities around the water bodies. So, and also taking care of WASH, that is water sanitation and hygiene, for not only in your own company but also in the supply chain. So taking care of the land degradation and soil health, and also on the food safety, and also taking care of the food loss. So as a result, we partner with various organizations and we look at this initiative. And with this, I come to the end of my presentation, and I now call my colleague Gonzalo to come and talk about the technology. Both Gonzalo and Dr. Joseph are going to speak about technology, so I made sure that we have Carla in between so that you don't get too much bored with too much of data. Gonzalo, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Today I want to focus on how technology is helping growers facing the challenge of the future to produce more with less and in a more sustainable way and fairly way for the small growers, small farmers. First of all, I will introduce the company where I work. We call it Spatec Group. We are based in Spain, but with operations an office in Latin America and South Europe. And what we work is in offer intelligence services and technological solutions to improve decision-making for the growers, producer, from small farmers to medium and large organizations. So we work in the transactional way and how to things happen from the seeds to the factory, even to the wholesalers, but also from an intelligence perspective on how the decisions are made and what to crop, where, when to irrigate, when to sell, to whom, okay? So we have like 1,050 experts, agronomists, artificial intelligence engineers, big data engineers, but mostly agronomists and economists. Okay? So our area's expertise is how to get data and how to transform data into information in the whole agri-food chain. And the agri-food chain, we are not calling the chain Agri-Food chain. We would like to call from now on Agri-Food Network because it's changing. The consumer is now digital worldwide, doesn't matter the country, so the chain has to adapt. The way the producers move goods, money, data, information, relationship at the end through the chain with the rest of the stakeholders until the consumers is changing very fast, and this means that new players are coming. And all is happening because digitalization, because how we use this. The farmers at the fields, but us as consumers, okay? And there are plenty of trends that impact on the farmers and the way they produce food. And there is a new generation of consumers that today, the millennial and people that is digital born, that they don't have weight today in the decision making when we buy, but tomorrow they are going to have the power of the decision. So the producers and all the Agri-Food Network must adapt to that kind of consumer that today is not impacting the sector, but tomorrow it's going to be it's going to have a very huge impact and more flexible. So for that, our vision is the Agri-Food Network is going to be dynamic, that the relationships between the different stakeholders, from the producers, small or big, to the factories, the plant, the transformation holders, the logistics, the companies, wholesaler companies, retail companies, they are going to change. They are going to be more dynamic and sometimes quite different. It's going to depend on the kind of good, the kind of product, the timing, then the relationships, data relationship, economic relations will adapt. So it's not going longer to be an agri-food chain. And technologies in agriculture has a lot of things to do, but they are not the goal. They're a mean to an end. So it's very important to clarify this because sometimes we love the technology more than the profit that they can give. So in agriculture, in AgTech, in order to produce more with less, there are three poles or three big groups of technologies. All the technologies called Internet of Foods and Farms, what we call IoT, but for the agriculture sector, and the software and the applications, is the way that the farmers and all the rest of the stakeholders, a way to record data, a way to get data automatically more easily. And we are talking about here about satellite drones, application, get a picture. I would show some examples. The next is, once we have technology getting the data, let's transform the data into information. And that's when the IA, the machine learning, or the big data comes. Okay? In this sector, in the agri-food sector, there are plenty of investment in model the crops and also model the markets. And the crops are quite difficult to model because this is biologic production. It's plants, weather, soil, labor, machinery, all together to produce a good. So it's very complex to model. But we are investing, not only my company, a lot of companies, in how to transform data into information, and how to get the decision makers through the analytics stairs from descriptive analytic to diagnostic analytics to predictive analytics to prescriptive analytics. Okay. And the third group is the robotics, autonomous actions. Okay. Once we can record data, transform data into information, we have to transform the information into decisions and the decisions into actions. And here comes all the robotics that they play in two groups. They can record, a tractor can record data, but also a tractor execute actions. So this is the three main groups of technology that are impacting right now the agri-food sector. And it's not only in the fields. Okay, these three groups are impacting in the whole chain. Okay, but when we talk about technology, we usually make a mistake. We talk about the technology itself, and then what decision can impact the implementation of the technology. But the question is not that. The question is, what is the decision that makes me as a grower, as a farmer, as an agri-food business make profit or lose money? From that, what information I am using to take that decision, to make that decision? What data is behind the information? And then how can I apply technology in order to improve the data, in order to improve also the information and then the decision making? So some examples, very, very quick. There are plenty of new technologies in Internet of Food and Farms. Not only the old weather station, but there is a lot of investment and new technology in cameras, in how to identify and follow the crop growth with images. Drones, satellite, we are talking a lot of, but there's another kind of sensor which can fly, but there's another one. The mobile phone is going to have a huge impact, the application for the farmers, because all the farmers has one with a camera, so it's easy to take pictures in order to identify pests, diseases, growth stages. Okay, so there is a huge investment in artificial intelligence, in visual recognition, and how to identify through a photo a pest. Okay, amend? 1 minute. Okay, amending. Very, very important. The farmers or the decision makers in this sector, they do not make the decisions most of the time based in the rational part of the brain. They took it based on the emotional. It's more important for them the perception of the price of the neighbor than their own P&G. Okay? So, and I want to end with some quotes or some ideas. By the way, this is my daughter, and this is a very important thing. My daughter likes to hear music when we give them we food here. So we think, okay, we will give her an AirPods, so we don't need the cable, and she can run. So we gave her the AirPods. So now she's free to listen music and to eat at the same time. But we didn't train her on how to use the AirPods. So if you look at the pictures, she doesn't use properly. So here the tale is that the training for all the agri-food, because we are talking about technology, is the most important thing. It doesn't matter the technology, the formation, the education, the training, the most important thing. Otherwise, waste money. Okay? Don't get lost in touch. Begin to record data. We need data in order to generate information, and this is one of the lacks of this sector. So technology is only a tool. We need useful data in order to make analytics. We need farmers to be data-driven, and this is one of the goals or the barriers of the sector. Business culture. It's in many countries. They think I own a farm, but they have to think I own a business. The decisions, begin with the decisions, and then came down to the technology. AgTech is not about saving costs. It's about improving incomes, okay? And as I said, training, education is key. Otherwise, waste money. And data is an asset for the farmers, for the whole sector. And we need to realize that we need to evangelize for that. Okay, thank you.
Carlo?
Thank you very much for the invitation as well. Okay. So coming to this, I'm going to take you a little step back as to when we're asked, how do you reveal the power of agriculture through agri-food innovation? I want to take a look as to why isn't it already has happened so fast? I mean, take technology, implement it, should be simple. But it's not that simple, and let's take a look into why. Because while technology has extraordinary promises to the agriculture industry, there is a complexity that we need to address. And Lauren Fries from the World Economic Forum, she gave us a good insight of what it's going to look like in 2030. She said, imagine opening your fridge in 2030. Maybe that meant meat came from a single cell grown in clean meat in a lab. Perhaps the leftover rice was gene edited with CRISPR-Cas9, or the lettuce was produced with a personal food computer in a city building through a data recipe. Maybe the sustainability of the palm oil in your margarine was monitored with satellites with advanced imaging power, or the women who grew your eggplants were paid via blockchain. Perhaps the fridge itself will be smart, sending you notifications to eat the cheese before it goes green. All these new approaches, though, come up with new questions. Who creates the technology? Who controls it? Who controls the data? Where is the data? What happens to those 800 million farmers who are reaching over retirement age that will eventually all become automated? What's going to happen to our farms? How are we going to reach nature? How are we going to understand biodiversity? So this is a question we continue to ask, and the solution is not simple, because agriculture is actually a 10,000-year-old industry. And farmers, once upon a time, they knew who they were producing for. Now that's not the case. The last 100 years, this changed. And this changed because more and more people were going towards cities. Urbanization has grown. So now we had to grow the food far from where it was needed, store it, transport it, whether it be by rail or ship, and then get it to the table of the consumer. This created a commodity system which became quantified. For every bushel met a certain number of specs. And this has been working for the last 100 years. And this is what's been feeding the billions of people for the last 100 years. But now the cracks have fell through. And we need to take a look as to how technology will be able to support the system, but yet, how do we transform it in a way that actually the farmers could adopt the technology onto their farms? So yes, agriculture could be solved, and it could solve a number of the SDG goals that we speak about today. And as agriculture is a $6.4 trillion industry, there's a huge impact to go towards this direction. And it employs 40% of the global workforce. But yet, today, it only contributes to less than 3.5% of the GDP. And at the same time, while we are aware of 12,000 edible species in our global world menu, today our menu consists of only 30 plant species. This is less than 1% of our total potential of our world menu. Less than 1%. Do you understand the economic opportunity out of this? But this can't happen over time because biodiversity is a knowledge economy as well. And our farmers themselves are a knowledge economy, as well as the caretakers of our earth. So if we don't integrate this system in a way that works for all, through sustainable and a partnership approach, it will not work. Our commodity system has driven us by creating quantity over quality, making agriculture the third industry for climate change. 26% is due because of agriculture. And while agriculture ecosystems provide humans with food, forage, bioenergy, and pharmaceuticals and are essential to human well-being, and agri-food innovation could really provide and reveal the potential of agriculture, transformation is challenging. And this is the very reason why. It's very complex because it involves national policies. It involves different production systems, different market structures, and the history of each particular production context and its own approach to rural development and its related constraints. So to give you an actual picture, to take one step back, if you were to leave here today and understand what's the actual complexity of it, let me give you a very simple explanation. You have governments who are providing you with quantified regulations, not quality, but quantity. You have farmers or growers who have low profit margins and are being told to take the risk of implementing their technologies because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are going to take the risk and they don't know by who. So to implement these risks also is going to cost them, which would mean that the crops would actually become, food would become more expensive. And consumers, while they're demanding for more sustainable and more healthier foods, are not willing to pay a higher price. So it's a very vicious cycle. And for actual countries that have low disposable income, it's going to be even more challenging because you'll end up with food inflation, which would be something that governments would dread. So the solution, in order to change and move forward, would mean that we need to decommoditize the agriculture system. And in order to do that, it's unable to achieve it without bringing together and creating a system working all together. So to do this and to be the ones, we don't have, there's not one particular one-size-fits-all. And the only people who could really solve this vicious circle are the problem solvers, the entrepreneurs themselves. And this needs to work at the very local level because there are problems that we don't know, we're not aware about. We might see the latest trends, but there's things that are happening on the very local level. And we need a system of people and relationships that surround the agripreneurs that could help them succeed to do that. Now we're in over 60 countries, and we've seen that to identify the local problems, we can't do it ourselves. The local entrepreneurs do it. They bring up problems that we've never even heard of. They bring up problems that we need to solve first, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be speaking to the policy, whether it be the value chain in itself that doesn't work. And these are the role models we need to bring out and create to transform communities in order to solve more and more problems. So take, for example, Adnan. Adnan came from Pakistan. He came to us with just an idea because he came to us with a problem nobody was speaking about. Farmers were losing their profits because they were stealing each other's cows. Who speaks about that? We don't hear that in the newspaper, but this is a real problem in Pakistan. So he came to us with an idea back in 2014 with just Fitbit for cows. It was a great idea. We took it forward, we helped him implement, we supported him with a network, and since then, he's managed to go to Y Combinator. He's been invested by Ashton Kutcher, the actor, as well as the twins of, the Wilkinson's twins, who were the ones who sued Mark Zuckerberg. But now he's become a role model in Pakistan. He's transformed his community. He's become a billboard in Pakistan, making more and more entrepreneurs want to make a difference. And this is the type of change we want to work. We want to work at the very local level that could actually change, starting to make the corporates around the entrepreneurs realize that change is happening, they need to make change, and also influencing government level. So we thank you very much and hope you join us, because I think my time's up. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Good afternoon. I think the challenges the world is facing in terms of food and agriculture are well rehearsed. Let me nonetheless throw a couple of numbers at you. As you probably know, we still need to feed another 2 billion people by 2050, 2.5 billion of which will be urban. That means actually rural areas will even shrink. 800 million people are still undernourished. 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient deficiencies. More than 1 billion people suffer from overweight and obesity. So we have a widespread burden of malnutrition all over the world, not only in developing countries, but also in developed countries. We have serious resource challenges. Agriculture is the key user of water. 70% of all water is used by agriculture. Agriculture is a main emitter of greenhouse gases. We just learned it's 25% or 26%. Agriculture is a drain on biodiversity. Agriculture is a drain on land use change, on deforestation, and so on and so forth. So the question is, how can we master all these challenges within the resources we are facing? That's actually most of the work we do at FAO. At least it's a big part of it, and it's a big part of the work that we are doing in my division. And that's me. I'm Joseph Schmitzuber. I'm the Deputy Director of the Trade and Markets Division at FAO. So I had a whole range of different technologies and disruptors that I wanted to present, but we agreed in preparation of the panels to keep it really short. So there will be only two that I want to present to you today. The first is what we call controlled environment production. And you may not have heard about it, but it's nothing really complicated, and I come to this in a moment. And the other one is financial disruptors or financial innovation, which are, I think, a lot more important than the technical side, and I will explain why. So what is controlled environment production? You certainly know what a greenhouse is, and controlled environment production is essentially greenhouses in all sizes, from a grow container that you can keep at home to a 10-hectare greenhouse that is totally climate controlled, open or semi-closed or closed, under perfect climate conditions, cooled, always keeping a Mediterranean diet, sensor enabled, etc., etc. Very efficient in terms of resource use, and so on and so forth. And it was about 3 years ago that I was sent actually on a mission to the UAE, trying to identify ways how the UAE can increase its food production. And I thought that's a real bad idea. Or with all the experience we have from the region, the last thing I should be doing here is advising the government on how to increase production, because that inevitably comes at higher resource costs. And while going through the various options, we actually discovered something that could work, and that's controlled environment production. But it is an incredibly know-how and resource-intensive way of producing agriculture, but it does work in the harshest climates of the world, including here in the UAE. And I will come back to this in a moment and illustrate it a little bit. So it's nothing new. As I said, it's already here. There's one established company called Beva. It's working together with Al Dhafra. And there's another smaller one called Pure Harvest. Crop One is not yet in Dubai. They made a big announcement that they will come and produce the largest vertical farm, supplying Emirates Airways on an exclusivity contract, but that's apparently not happened. But it's actually widespread, and even if you haven't heard about it, it comes out of the Netherlands, it comes out of Wageningen in particular, where in the Netherlands we have already 400 hectares of controlled environment production, but it's not even the biggest. It's available in, or it's implemented in Russia, where we probably have the largest areas in the Americas, but also in Asia. And it actually thrives in the most complicated environments. It also is actually a way to address only a small part of our food challenge. It's quite often sold as the recipe to address food security. That is not the case, and it's actually the wrong ticket to sell it. It's a way to diversify the diet, to increase the fruits and vegetables production, and actually that works. So it's really working well with products like tomatoes or kale or lettuce or capsicum or berries of all sorts, but it's not working with any staple crop. So it's certainly not a source of calories, but it's a very neat way to increase food production and increase food self-sufficiency. And actually, to our big surprise, when we went through the parameters that drive the profitability 3 years ago, we thought it's a perfect match to the environment here in the UAE because it thrives on cheap energy. And that's exactly what we have here. We have cheap CO2 as a fertilizer, and you can run these operations even in a carbon negative way. We have relatively cheap access to fertilizer, labor, land, and with new water technology, it's even possible to overcome the water footprint that is inevitable. And it's actually, the water footprint is not deep, but the water scarcity, of course, creates an enormous problem. So even on a resource, from a resource perspective, it can easily compete with air-freighted tomatoes or air-freighted fruits and vegetables, and can do so on an economically sound basis, competing at prices of 60 to 70%. And the government actually has understood this and is providing the enabling environment for this technology and is actually helping it. So you may ask yourself, how does that look like? That's a picture that was actually from National Geographic, and that's from the Netherlands. Of course, that's not necessarily anything you want to have here, but it's incredibly productive. You can produce on a very small piece of land enormous amounts of fruits and vegetables, and it's exactly what you actually would like to have in the UAE. That's an example, and I always keep that in, of an urban agriculture system that's already bankrupt. So it's economically very challenging to master this, and that's one of the things that didn't work out, and it's always important to bear in mind. That's one of the companies that's actually operating here in the UAE now, and that was also one of our recommendations, and they're doing quite well. And that was the operation a couple of months ago, and they are already selling tomatoes. That's the other plant that's much bigger, that's Beva, and also working here. And that's, again, from the Netherlands. That's really a big operation, and many different operations together on an area of about 400 hectares. So I will skip all the other applications. Many of them actually we work directly with, or we have applied in our division, particularly the machine learning and artificial intelligence applications that we use for different purposes. And I'm more than happy to entertain questions you may have on these things, including on blockchain, etc., where we publish a lot and develop a lot. And I myself do that too. And I'm not getting into any of this, but I would like to skip right to the investment disruptors. So what is the problem actually in terms of reaching the SDGs? The problem is that we need an enormous amount of money. Whatever that estimate may be, take the $4 trillion that has been published by the UN is probably a good estimate. And that's incremental investment, so that's additional investment that we need. If you juxtapose this with what is available from the public sector, then you see that ODA, for instance, depending on how we account for this, between 130 and 160 billion dollars is the infamous drop in the bucket. So that cannot allow us to reach the SDGs. So the only way of reaching the SDGs is actually to mobilize the private sector. And then this was essentially our starting questions. How can we mobilize the private sector? How can we do it at FAO? And we actually tried to take stock of our resources. And what we found is actually we are rich in many ways. We are certainly rich when it comes to all sorts of soft laws and guidances and regulations that we offer to the world, and actually normally to the public sector, but we can also transform them so that they are useful for the private sector. And that's exactly what we tried to do. We turned all the rules and regulations that we have, so for instance, the right to food, the responsible agricultural investment guidelines, the guidelines on responsible land tenure, the sustainable fisheries guidelines, the sustainable forest management, and we added to this the guidances and guidelines from many other international organizations, from the CBD, from the ECE Aarhus agreement, the OECD Multilateral Enterprise Agreement, and so on and so forth. And we turned all of these different agreements into 3 products relevant for the private sector, so that the private sector actually has a guidance in terms of using all these agreements for their private businesses. And so the 3 products are actually in this publication. It's essentially a model enterprise policy, so something that a company can do and knows what to do in order to be in compliance with our rules and regulations. The other is a mitigation framework, so if it's not happening, then they have the rules and regulations, or they have the guidance on how to move towards the rules and regulations. And the third is a due diligence framework, which comprises 5 steps. I'm happy to get into this, but right. So that was the first step. The second step is, and I'm finishing with this slide, is essentially how can we hook this up to financial innovation? And that's perhaps something that we can leave for the discussion, because there's not enough time, but there is a whole range of different incentive models that can be hooked up to a sustainability framework. You know many of them. You've heard about subsidized loans, of course, blended finance, tax incentives, de-risking strategies, or simply intangible incentives such as sustainability seals. So to close the circle, in order to live up to the challenges, financial innovation is probably just as important as technical innovation is. And with this, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Joseph. So we have heard very good views from all the speakers, and we'll have a short 5-minute panel discussion and about 5 to 10 minutes of discussion with the audience. How much? Okay, so we are short of time. So very quick, I have got 2 questions. One is from Carla, that very briefly, can you tell us how do we look at the emerging markets and Africa and Latin America and South Asia? How do we bring the sustainability into these markets? I understand that the developed markets have already done well and they are on the bandwagon, but how do we get them? Very briefly, very short comment.
Again, what happens in emerging markets in this case is that you have very dispersed and very complex, because there's no system, there's no union per se, that everything works throughout the continent. So you really have to work down on the local level. And in these regions, there's not only about just implementing the technology, you also have to deal with infrastructure, connectivity, policies, regulations. There's a lot of bureaucracy in these levels. So it's a matter of not trying to find the problems ourselves, but really instigating the problem solvers to be able to sustain those produce those solutions in a sustainable way, where you don't even have to, it's not about finding the grant, find the solution, try to implement it, who are the right, so it's not a top-down level. It's really, if you try to get to the roots of the problem and get the real solvers to solve it, then I think that's a way. It's a long-term vision, but I think it's a sustainable one as well.
Talking about the producers, what do you say, Gonzalo? How do we get the smallholders on this job? How do we get them into the sustainability mode? How do we help them to adopt the technology which are sustainable? Very brief comment.
Yes, smallholders need to group. They need to cooperate. They need to share the investment in technology. Otherwise, they are not going to be able to compete with large growers. So one way is the idea of data cooperatives. It's a way to share data, technology investment, in order to have enough amount of data knowledge to be ready to make better decisions. So the way is to show them the profit in being data-driven and being cooperative in terms of being digital.
Yeah. So data cooperative. What do you say, Joseph? How much money, you somewhere mentioned in your presentation $4.2 trillion. From where we are going to get this money? Money is in the private hands. Out of that $85 trillion which is available for investment in the world, 65 is with you and me, the private wealth, right? So that is not going to get into sustainability as of now. And most of the solutions are in the public sector and on the development finance institution. What is your big idea? How do we make sure that if the consumer is not paying for the sustainable goods, from where the money is going to come from, and is that enough?
Right. Just to rehearse the key numbers. The fundamental problem is that the amount of money that is required to reach the SDGs, as you said, it's more than $4 trillion every year, is way above the possibility of the public sector to generate this. There's just no way. And bear in mind, this is incremental money. That's additional money. That's in addition to what is already given. And so the public sector at the moment, in terms of ODA, gives about $130 billion. That's it. This is the drop in the bucket. The only way to overcome that financing gap is to bring in the private sector. And so
you said token. You mentioned something about token.
Right. So there is a mechanism to do this. And the key thing is now to marry the technical innovations with the financial innovations. And one of the things is tokenization. Let me briefly explain this. It doesn't help us if the private sector just comes in and throws money at the problem if the money is not thrown at the sustainability of the issue. And sustainability can be environmental, can be social. So the way we want to see the private sector invest is actually to make an impact, and this is really the literal impact, improve the social, improve the environmental things. So what we are trying to do is give essentially a value, securitize the intangible things that we want to have. So intangible things are deforestation free, are child labor free, are occupational health and safety conform, are all sorts of social and environmental things, and we want to give it a token, and that token can be verified, and once that token is verified, it can be put on the blockchain. Once it's on the blockchain, it can actually be traded, and once it can be traded, it can be hoarded, it can be accumulated, and it can be sold. And
like Bitcoin.
Like a Bitcoin, and so you actually can invest in this.
May I pause you there? Sure. So got your point on blockchain and Bitcoin and token. We are absolutely in the end of our presentation. We can have just one question from the audience. Anybody who has got the question? In case there is no question, we can come to this end. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And let's thank the speakers. You have been great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much to the speakers, and thanks to the audience.